So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Tammy McLeod, and I am the President and CEO of the Flinn Foundation. And for anyone in the audience who is not familiar with the Foundation, we are a privately endowed philanthropic grant-making organization established in 1965 by Dr. Robert and Irene Flinn. Our mission is to improve the quality of life in Arizona to benefit future generations. And we do that by supporting 4 pillars: the biosciences, arts and culture, civic leadership, and a college scholarship program, and all of those for the benefit of Arizona. The foundation historically supported healthcare, though in 2001, we made a big bet. We narrowed our healthcare focus to a specific area that we felt the foundation could have the greatest impact. That area was the biosciences, and we announced the initial commitment of $50 million over 10 years. In 2002, we worked with community leaders and Battelle to develop a long-term plan to advance our bioscience sector, known as the Arizona Bioscience Roadmap. Today, that plan is the longest-running, active, statewide strategic plan in the nation. And the roadmap aims to position Arizona as a national leader and a global competitor in specific areas of the biosciences by leveraging our distinct bioscience assets. It aims to create improved healthcare outcomes for Arizonans, to create high-paying jobs, and also to create a stronger, more diversified economy. Accountability has been one of the key tenets of that roadmap. And since the very first day, we've been tracking a consistent set of performance metrics on the growth of Arizona's bioscience sector and reporting those results out to the community. That's why we're here today. We've been doing this same event annually for 20 years. We have 2 features for you today. First, Mitch Horowitz and Ryan Helwig of Teconomy Partners. They're going to report the latest bioscience performance metrics covering the 2 years since our last update. But they've also collected data points that will allow us to compare back to 2002. Then we have a terrific panel of innovation thought leaders who will react to the data and give us their perspective. This includes Chris Camacho of the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, Dr. Betsy Cantwell, Senior Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Arizona, and Gabrielle Finley Hazel, President and CEO of Dignity Health Arizona Central and West Valley Market. That panel will be moderated by Eve Ross, the chair of Arizona's Bioscience Roadmap Steering Committee. The past 2 decades have been truly transformative, as I believe you'll see in the data shortly. But after 2 decades of sustained growth, we now see it every day with our very own eyes. Where dirt lots used to sit in 2002, now we see research facilities, incubators, and company headquarters. For instance, TGen got its start in 2002. And did you know that the lot where TGen sits originally was slated to be a new stadium for the Arizona Cardinals? Today it hosts the 6-story TGen building and the Phoenix Biomedical Campus. I want to say congratulations to TGen for turning 20 years old also. The Flinn Foundation is proud to have played an integral role in its formation. In Tucson, the Bio5 Research Institute grew out of the ground in 2006 on the northeast side of the University of Arizona campus. Today, the Thomas W. Keating Research Building hosts 35 research labs and has over 175,000 square feet. And in Flagstaff, dignitaries broke ground in 2007 on the NACET incubator. That provides startup, tech, and life science companies a place to begin. Today, the beautiful facility on McMillan Mesa features the incubator, an accelerator, and manufacturing space. Those are just a few of the examples, but much more is happening before our eyes. Mayo Clinic's Discovery Oasis Biotech Corridor, for example, numerous science buildings on ASU campus, and the Bridges Multi-Use Innovation Park at the University of Arizona. By the way, the Flinn Foundation Communications team has compiled a brochure that highlights the progress of Arizona Biosciences over the past 2 years. It also has a timeline of major milestones over the past 20 years of the Bioscience Roadmap, and you can access the brochure on our website. The address will be posted in the chat box below. In fact, you can find the entire catalog of annual bioscience progress reports dating back to the very launch of the roadmap. So before we begin the program, I want to recognize several individuals that we expect in our audience today. Their names will appear on the screen. First, I'll begin with our elected officials. We have a number of state legislators, county supervisors, mayors, and city council members joining us today. Thank you so much for the important role that you play in moving Arizona forward. Our Bioscience Roadmap Steering Committee members. The committee is comprised of over 135 leaders from the public and private sectors in science, healthcare, business, academia, and policy. It's the leadership group responsible for guiding Arizona's Bioscience Roadmap. And there are too many names to list on the slide, but I personally would like to cite several committee leaders that are expected to be with us today. First, Eve Ross, our chair, Heather Carter, our vice chair, and our former chairs, Mark Slater, Ron Schupman, and Marty Schultz. Thank you to each of you for your contributions that you've made in support of the Roadmap Initiative. And we have Flinn Foundation board members. Welcome to Dr. Heidi Janinga, Sean Kirkpatrick, and Dr. Eric Ryman. I thank you personally for the guidance that you provide to me. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speakers from Techonomy Partners, Mitch Horowitz and Ryan Helwig. Techonomy is a spinoff of Battelle, formed in 2015, and many of the Techonomy team members have worked on the Arizona Roadmap for years, including Mitch and Ryan. Mitch goes back to the roadmap's very first days. Mitch is co-founder and senior fellow, and Ryan is principal and project director. Both are experts in technology-based economic development, and you can find their bio sketches via the link posted in the chat box. If you have any questions during their presentation, please enter them in the chat, and I'll return to pose your questions to Mitch and Ryan following their presentation. Now, Mitch and Ryan, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you, Tammy. It's a great pleasure for Ryan and I to be with all of you again and taking stock of Arizona's progress in the biosciences, especially with this being the 20th year since the roadmap was launched. As Tammy mentioned, we're going to both take a look at the recent 2-year period, but we're also going to take a much longer view of what the last 20 years has meant in terms of the growth of the biosciences in Arizona. As Tammy mentioned as well, I've had the opportunity to assist in developing the roadmap back 20 years ago and recognize a lot of good friends who are joined us today and have really appreciated just how far Arizona has come. And it's truly a compliment to all of you and having the staying power in your shared focus and vision in bringing this roadmap into its 3rd decade. So congratulations to all of you. You are part of something very special. So what is the Biosciences Roadmap? It's a 20+ year plan to raise Arizona's competitiveness in the biosciences. It was commissioned by Flinn, but really represented the broad community and was quite remarkable in how it generated public support all across Arizona. It was something that now we have the privilege to track with you. And while its goals in the beginning were quite modest, really all about creating a new economic driver for the state of Arizona, something that could diversify the state's economy while also offering access to health innovations that could really improve the quality of life for Arizonans. Its focus was very much about leveraging growing research strengths and building a critical mass of firms. Over the years, this roadmap has dramatically matured and continued to raise its sights. As the roadmap entered its 2nd decade, it deepened and sharpened its focus on where Arizona will excel and how it will compete. It identified real areas of excellence for Arizona, things like precision medicine and cancer, neurosciences, bioengineering, diagnostics, and agricultural biotech. And you'll be hearing a bit more about those things as we have tracking success. It also focused on the key development resources and the overall innovation ecosystem needed to be competitive. This year's performance review shows continued progress as well as opportunities for Arizona to further its position in biosciences in the years ahead. It's a very strong report card. Across every measure, you're going to see gains. But of course, areas of improvement as well, since it's hard to keep pace overall with the country. And so you'll see places where Arizona can really continue to make a mark. One area that has stood out, one metric that has stood out is the continued outpacing the country in the job gains. And as Ryan will go into more detail, you'll see that this consistent trend not only stands out nationally, but actually has really led private sector employment in Arizona. VC investments reached an all-time high in 2021, and the R&D base is continuing its upward trajectory, and NIH funding remains strong in its gains as well. Still, as we look across the 20 years and think about how far Arizona has come, we recognize that the future also has some key requirements to it. And one of that is, how do we raise the higher value activities in the bioscience? How do we ensure that the biosciences can bring not only increased jobs, but increased economic output and wages for the workforce? And how can we begin to really take a view towards the next chapter in this great story of Arizona's Biosciences Roadmap? With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, and he's going to take us through a lot of the metrics around industry development.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Tammy. It's great to be with everyone to provide an update on all this exciting progress made under the roadmap effort, both recently as far as the update goes and using this opportunity to take a 2-decade look back. So I'll be walking us through an update on the industry's position and recent performance, primarily with respect to jobs and employment gains, but also touching on wages, economic output, productivity, and providing some regional updates on growth in the biosciences industry. But before we walk through, it's always important to level set and to remind folks of the biosciences industry definition that really reflects the breadth and diversity of the industry across 6 major industry subsectors, and very much in line with the definition we've developed over many years working closely with bio at a national level, but includes the hospital segment and, very importantly, academic research and all the biomedical advances that are both rooted in and deployed across hospitals. As we step back and look at where we stand today, Arizona employs just over 133,000 in the biosciences industry. That's 5.5% of the state's overall private sector, so a very sizable footprint. As you can see on the left, hospitals dominate biosciences employment, not only in Arizona, but nationally under this industry concept, accounting for about 3 in 4 bioscience jobs. But on the right side, you can see Arizona's industry composition for the non-hospital biosciences, or the industrial biosciences, if you will, which are broad-based in Arizona, with distribution being the largest individual segment at about 11,000 jobs in Arizona, and medical devices and research, testing, and medical labs not far behind at about 9,000 jobs each in 2020. Drugs and pharmaceuticals, which has been growing along with all of the aspects or individual segments of the industry, is approaching 4,000 jobs in the state. As Mitch indicated, we've been outpacing the nation in bioscience industry job growth. This chart is quite impressive. It shows the steady and continuous growth in the industry in Arizona over nearly 2 decades. And frankly, this is striking. As Mitch and I and our team works around the country, you rarely see a nice, steadily increasing, pretty much uninterrupted slope here. So since 2002, on average, Arizona has added 3.5% every year to its bioscience payrolls, compared to a 1.3% average growth rate for the US, so about 2.5 times the average annual growth rate. We're pleased to report that Arizona has continued to outpace the US in overall biosciences job growth since 2018, the data that were presented in our last update 2 years ago, growing 5% since 2018 compared with 1% nationally. And this includes a very challenging initial year of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the industry has proven resilient during that first year, through that first year of the pandemic. And 5 of the 6 industry subsectors we just showed have grown since 2018. And those 5, with the exception of research and testing, have outpaced the country. Contributing to these job gains, as you might expect, are companies moving into Arizona, and Flinn has been tracking these, companies like Align Technology, Eurofins, LifeStance, Medivant, as well as our existing employers who are expanding operations, firms like Becton Dickinson, Caris, Exact Sciences, and Roche. And our health systems are undergoing major expansions with Banner, Dignity, Tenet, Valleywise, and Abrazo, all increasing employment in their footprint with major investments in recent years. As we pivot to look intrastate, it's always valuable for us to look at the biosciences against Arizona's overall private sector. And in addition to the high wages we know the biosciences deliver, we know that the industry delivers life-saving and life-enhancing innovations. The economic value proposition of the biosciences is this steadiness over time and its ability to bolster a state or regional economy like Arizona's during recessions and difficult economic periods. So what we've done in the next slide is start to unpack this a little bit and look at the growth of the biosciences relative to the private sector, relative to the nation over key business cycles. And these last 2 decades, what you see are the biosciences consistently outperforming the private sector, particularly notable during those periods of recession like 2007 and 2009, and the COVID-19 year of 19 to 20 when the private sector declined. But what you see is this really impressive recovery and expansion period from 2009 to 19, where we're getting these really high double-digit job growth numbers, and the industry has grown by nearly 40%, now outpacing the country. So very exciting growth story. There's a lot of data presented on this slide, we know, but what we're showing is the longer-term progress and results of this outsized job growth across bioscience subsectors. So with steady gains across nearly every subsector over this period, the biosciences have risen, as you can see in the last line of this table, from about 3.9% to 5.5% of Arizona's private sector jobs. And today, 1 of every 18 state jobs are in the biosciences industry directly. Sticking with this concept of moving the needle over the longer term, Arizona's steady growth is increasing also its share of the national pie. As a share of all U.S. bioscience jobs, the state stands at nearly 2% now, up from 1.3% when the roadmap was first initiated and adopted, a very significant increase over time. And this progress made across every subsector in these shares is leading to greater concentrations in Arizona relative to the country. That's where economists and folks like Mitch and I use location quotients, where a 1.0 location quotient in that far right column means our concentration as a state is matching the national level. We're very excited to report, as you can see, these sort of double upward arrows for drugs and pharma and medical devices, that we've seen now our first state subsector move into what we consider to be a specialized employment concentration for the state, and that's medical devices, which is now 20% more concentrated in Arizona relative to the national average. So that's that very strong location quotient we're seeing. As one would expect, all this steady and impressive job growth is translating into rising economic output as measured by gross regional product on the left side of this chart. What's exciting to see, I think, as we look at this is just in the last several years, we're starting to see Arizona diverge from the national trend line and actually grow at a more rapid clip. And GRP really speaks to the value and value add of production in the state. Underlying these numbers and what's driving it is the industry's subsector composition and a whole host of products and services manufactured and sold both nationally and globally. And as we think about Arizona's next chapter, which Mitch alluded to in the front end, I think we'd like to see a particular emphasis on innovation, product development, things that lead to really that greater value-added impact. As the chart on the right shows, we're lagging the nation in terms of value-added per worker, which is a measure of productivity in the non-hospital biosciences or industrial biosciences. So this is a key measure of productivity impacting wages and overall competitiveness that we want to continue to see grow. And if we stay on that good GRP trajectory, we should see that. That leads us into the wage positioning and situation for Arizona. As you can see in the chart on the left, the biosciences represent a very high wage industry. 76,000 overall is the average annual wage in the biosciences. And in the non-hospital biosciences, it's even greater at 92,000 per worker per year. That's compared to the 58,000 overall average in the private sector. And reflecting in large part that concept of value-added activity, industry composition in the state, and worker productivity, Arizona wages are rising, which is tremendous, but still behind both national levels and the growth rate recently for the nation. So something to keep our eye on and continue to focus on that value add going forward. Just quickly, we know a lot of you represent various regions and metropolitan areas across the state, and it's great to have you. What's exciting about the biosciences development is, the varied niches and strengths that can be found across states, across regions, across metropolitan areas. Each Arizona metro really has its own strengths and flavor, based on its companies, their product and sector focus. In a region like Phoenix, we have broad-based and sizable employment footprints across lots of these areas, whereas in Flagstaff and Tucson, we have more concentrated and focused niches. So exciting to see that continue to play out and to develop. And from a growth perspective, the long-term growth and success that we've been talking about in Arizona's bioscience industry has translated to growth across all three metro regions. As you can see with job gains shown here from 2002 to 20, each region outpacing the country. We have two regions that have, in fact, doubled their employment base in the non-hospital biosciences since the roadmap began. Lots of double-digit growth rates and rapid growth seen across the state. So very exciting there. We also like to use these bubble charts because they reflect both the size, the growth rates, and the location quotients or relative concentrations, reflecting that strong growth across regions. Each of the bubbles you see here are far to the right side of the graphic. So that horizontal line or horizontal axis showing job growth over the 2 decades. Greater Phoenix has the largest bubbles, reflecting its large base of industry employment. In Flagstaff, the bubbles are positioned higher up the vertical axis, meaning they're strong and specialized concentrations relative to the size of its economy as measured by location quotients. So lots of exciting growth to report on. I'll turn it back now to Mitch to walk through the progress as we report out on the innovation ecosystem.
Thanks, Ryan. In many ways, the innovation ecosystem for the biosciences is both unique and very specialized. As I'm sure all of you are aware, biosciences development stands apart from many areas in technology development, with its especially close ties between basic research and new product development, its emphasis on translational research to go from bench to bedside, its unique requirement for clinical testing, and its key need for clinical excellence to provide insights and direction for innovation. Biosciences also has its own specific challenges for starting and scaling up new ventures, for the specialized skills required for the workforce, and even for the types of facilities needed by industry. This unique and specialized approach to biosciences development is what we seek to capture with the broader metrics I'm going to go through now on the innovation ecosystem. First, let's examine Arizona's recent trends in research. We see in academic research continued growth happening in Arizona, But after the faster growth from 2015 to 2018, the last 2 years have actually found a little bit of a lagging behind the nation. But an even more broad measure of research on the next slide looks at NIH funding. And here, in what many consider to be the gold standard for biomedical research, Arizona has truly been on a strong growth trajectory and has very positive news. Since 2015, Arizona has roughly doubled the national pace of growth, growing by roughly 100% compared to about 50% for the country. And over the past 2 years, Arizona grew by 18% compared to just under 16% for the country. So we could see a lot of strong growth here. But what's truly outstanding on the next slide is that we can report for this year's report card that Arizona reached a new high, a new milestone, a new high in its share of NIH funding overall. So this is quite an accomplishment and really shows the benefit of that higher growth. This NIH funding represents the broad institutional context in which research takes place in Arizona. It's really quite special. Not only are the universities and academic medical centers growing, but the hospitals and nonprofit research institutes both make up really important components of overall NIH funding, along with emerging industry through SBIR funding, which now is reaching nearly $29 million a year in Arizona. So this positive effort and trends in the research space is very significant, but it's only truly important if we know how to actually move forward and leverage it and commercialize it and advance innovation with it. And this next metric around university tech transfer is just that type of view. There's continued gains, as you can see in the second column, being made across all measures of university tech transfer over the last 2 years. And what's truly significant, another milestone for this year's report card, is that level of new business startups on the bottom row there at 52 over the last 2 years is the highest 2-year level achieved in Arizona. So quite an accomplishment going forward. But not only is university technology transfer important for measuring commercialization and innovation, also venture capital and the ability to translate the research discoveries into new businesses is also quite important. And Arizona continues to sustain its high level of VC activity that we really started to notice beginning in the year 2016. As I mentioned at the outset, 2021 represents the highest year of venture capital funding since the overall roadmap began back in 2002. And the VC deals, as you can see, has truly stabilized and kind of continued the strong trend of the recent years since 2016. And a lot of this really goes back to some things that Arizona has taken very positive steps, and the recent renewal of the angel investment tax credit really stands out. And we're seeing that multiple regions are really benefiting from these key venture capital investments. But when you put it into a national context, it's still very hard to keep pace with the boom nationally, not just in life sciences, but also across all technology areas. Venture capital investment has really soared in this country. And so we're going to unpack and take a look at what might be behind that a little bit. But clearly, it's really hard, even with the great gains that Arizona's made in the overall funding level, to keep pace with that national trend. On the deal side, and another way, another way to kind of see that is we like to come up with, to look at a metric of your venture capital funding relative to your NIH funding, a kind of a way to normalize and compare yourself to other places across the country. And what you see here is that, again, in the funding level, Arizona has some challenges in terms of the total amount of funding coming to it, and now relative to the strong base of NIH funding. So this is a theme we'll come back to as we continue to look at the overall performance metrics for this year. There's a little bit of a different story, though, around venture capital deal flow. And here's an area where Arizona has been holding its own relative to the country. And so this is, again, very positive, and it does show that angel investment tax credit and all of the good work that goes on now in university technology transfer and its increasing focus on startup activity. When we unpack that a little bit more, we can begin to start to understand why perhaps the funding is not growing as fast as it is nationally. When we look at venture capital deals by the stage of investment, what stands out is just how strong Arizona is in its share of pre-seed, angel, and seed venture investments. They represent 64% of the bioscience deals done over the 2018 to 2021 period. On the national level, that number was only 47%. So what we see here is that what Arizona is not able to do yet is really keep pace with the country in the more formal stages of venture capital funding provided by VC firms themselves. And this, in fact, may be one reason why we're not seeing the growth in the dollars. But another reason goes to the mix of where life science, bioscience, venture capital investment takes place. Arizona remains quite distinctive and highly specialized in the areas of medical devices, biosciences, IT and digital health, and healthcare services, all really high growth opportunity areas for advancing the biosciences. But correspondingly, what we see is that biopharmaceuticals is a much lower percentage of the overall venture capital investment taking place in biosciences in Arizona. And since biopharmaceuticals require so much more capital to sustain and scale up their businesses, you could begin to see that, in fact, that might be another reason why Arizona may be lagging a bit in the funding. So when we look overall across all of our metrics for this 2-year report card, there's only good news for Arizona in terms of its growth trajectory. So you can see all of those green arrows in that second column really reflects a number of real important highs. One, the continued strong job growth and the resilience being shown in Arizona relative to the pandemic, but just sustaining 20 years of phenomenal growth is quite remarkable. We also can see in this current report card a new high in NIH funding, a new high in the startup activity of technology transfer, a new high in venture capital funding for Arizona. But there's still room for improvement and areas where we hope we can continue for the next decade to see Arizona continue its maturation and its rise of its overall biosciences base. And this involves both the scaling up of new ventures and moving into higher value activities that can drive both economic output as well as wage growth. And so a very positive report card, but with areas of continued improvement needed. But when we take stock of the 20th anniversary, we feel a few key pictures can capture the progress being made in biosciences development in Arizona. These set of infographics really suggest the orders of magnitude of growth that have taken place in Arizona in biosciences development, from R&D to startup activity to job growth. It's really quite remarkable to see this high level of advancement all across the spectrum of growing this significant cluster in Arizona. And when you kind of take a look at it just over the trend lines, job growth has been the most consistent trend over the 20-year Biosciences Roadmap, and quite remarkable. While other measures have had some year-to-year fluctuations with some growth and then perhaps a little bit of a setback, what we see in the most recent years is continuing momentum growth across all the measures going forward. So, and with that growing momentum is a growing rise in national prominence. And that's best captured by kind of comparing the trend lines of Arizona to the US. So Arizona is the green line and the US is the blue line here. And what we see again is Arizona has been leaping forward in its biosciences development, especially in the ultimate measure of success in economic development terms, in terms of the growth of the industry. Additionally, Arizona's competitiveness and gains in biosciences research funding since 2015 has been quite strong. And the rise of venture capital deals in Arizona shows the commitment to innovation and commercialization taking place. But with the funding levels, it now shows we need to maybe have a much stronger focus around higher levels of scale-up funding so that we can truly capture the full economic benefits of commercialization and innovation. And then perhaps a new measure in the years ahead would be to add a new metric around economic output, which we can see has started to rise well above the country, and higher value added per worker, which really would show the kind of complexity and the depth of the product mix that's advancing in Arizona. And so with that, we'll pause, and if we have questions, if we have time, look forward to any questions. And if not, please do post your questions and we'll provide a response that Flinn will share with the presentation in its following correspondence. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mitch and Ryan, really appreciate that. And we have several questions that are coming right in. So really looking forward to hearing your thoughts, or in some cases, perhaps speculation on a couple of these. I think you had a slide around the universities, but can you speak just a little bit more about the impact of ASU and U of A, NAU on the data?
Sure. Well, on the data, I mean, they're measured quite directly through the academic research and the technology transfer. But, you know, the importance of universities and biosciences development is just kind of, it's part of the fabric of the overall cluster. I mean, it brings new talent, it brings graduate students and workforce. It's about the ability to have specialized facilities and often very unique areas of advantage in that research base. So, you know, it's very difficult to grow the biosciences without having an outstanding universities. And both U of A and ASU and NAU have all come a long way from back in 2002. We spent a lot of time working, and this is a community that has really come together. You talked earlier about TGen. It's a very important connective glue, and Mayo now, and all the healthcare systems, and how people have really come together. Perhaps maybe, you know, nothing better than like the Alzheimer's Research Center, the NIH-funded center, which really shows how Arizona has knows how to knit together its assets. So the universities are indispensable, and it's just hard to fully measure them only by the data alone.
Right. Yeah, you'd love to consider graduates along with this, to Mitch's points around talent, but between the R&D activities and the commercialization outcomes and the exciting amount of startups and these new shots on goal, if you will, for the biosciences in Arizona, major contributors to the ecosystem.
Absolutely. No question that starts a little bit earlier than that, Mitzi Crockover. And how do we make sure the educational system, from elementary to post-grad, can support the impressive growth? And are we making the right investments currently?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've profiled over time the intensiveness of both the skills mix and specifically STEM education skills and related knowledge to the biosciences. And really, as we look across the country, and we've done some work with pharma around this, even industry needs to be brought in, because I think we've seen industry take major initiatives to partner with educational institutions, to partner with K-12, to bring students along, to understand what the career opportunities are, to understand the types of skills and jobs available. So it's really, as we've seen in all hands on deck, need, but very much oriented around STEM skills. I think it's important to remind folks that this industry is very much about top talent, but at the same time, as we've profiled it in recently doing some work with the Coalition of State Bioscience Institutes, about a third of these jobs are in that sort of middle skills realm that requires more than a high school diploma, but some on-the-job training or associate's degree or certification. And so there's lots of opportunities as you get beyond high school and needs for the industry. But Mitch, feel free to add to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, this has always been an area of concern. Early in the first 10-year period, we actually worked very closely with the community college systems to investigate how we could deepen Arizona Biosciences workforce. And, it's an area of concern for industry. And so I agree with Ryan. I don't know that any place in this country is doing enough. And I also, I think industry recognizes that the workforce of the future is going to be much more diverse, and we need to find better avenues and continued work at it. But of course, along with, I don't know what it's called, but Arizona has gone out of its way, and I know how important it is, amongst the population. And you have dedicated sales tax and other things that, along with what I know as TRIF, I don't know that the education part is called TRIF, but these are the things that need to take place. And hopefully, by seeing the biosciences with its higher concentration today, the case, along with electronics growth and IT growth that happens in Arizona, hopefully everyone in Arizona appreciates you're a knowledge-driven economy. You are an advanced industry economy, and you need highly skilled workforce, and you can only do that with a great education system. So hopefully the demand for it will be very strong, and that will continue to push improvements.
I know many of us on this call hope the same thing. Interesting question here. Is there a correlation between the growth of the bioscience industry in Arizona and the health outcomes of the residents of the state?
It's not something we've measured, but we have seen in many ecosystems, the benefits that accrue to populations by having all this innovation in the state, by having clinical trial sites and access to new innovations that are, developed in state, tested in state, deployed across the state. It's not something we've measured in particular.
Right.
It's certainly a great question, though.
Yeah. Well, and I think if we think about it as access to health innovations, the best and most current cutting edge treatments, then I think the answer would be more affirmative. Health outcomes gets into so many other elements of lifestyle, and it's hard to fully.
So let's switch gears here a little. Do you think that the issue that we see in Arizona is lack of deals or lack of capital to fund the deals?
Yeah. So I do think that the deal level has taken on a kind of a next stage, and it's being sustained over time. And that is really important, because I think there was a a minor dip there over the 2016 period, and a lot of that is when you don't, when you have an angel investment tax credit that starts and stops, and I know this was a tremendous effort by the bioscience community to ensure that that got put back in place. So that's fantastic. The ability to get the follow-on capital, I mean, that's a bigger challenge, and that really requires a different kind of effort. But it does. But the prerequisite is having the initial deal flow moving forward and continuing to ensure you have great companies being formed with really strong management teams, and then working to connect them with the sources of formal venture capital. It's always good to have some lead investors. We haven't looked at this issue for a couple of years in Arizona in depth, but that is very much the next chapter that has to be written in Arizona. And it's not that companies can't get funding, because we're seeing some significant successes in follow-on financing, but it's just not at the same level, at least from what we can tell, probably even controlling for the mix of sectors that you fund as it is in other parts of the country.
That's right. Well, you saw some great evidence of our angel investments, and I saw some great acknowledgments in the chat for the healthy angel ecosystem we have. But what do you see as the role of private equity and middle market financing in growing the biosciences?
Yeah, I mean, private equity can often compete with venture capital funding, and I do believe in PitchBook they do measure as much as they can, because it's hard sometimes to know all the full announcements. Private equity dollars as well. So I think that's all part of the solution, and there's not a silver bullet, but what it requires is raising the profile of Arizona in a way that I know you all are attracting a lot of people from California. Now we got to start attracting the venture capital from California.
For sure, for sure. And Mitch, at the end of your presentation, you talked about 2 new metrics that you sort of proposed. Can you elaborate on those at all?
Yeah, sure. No, I think that we use these metrics a lot in our work around the country, working with different bioscience communities. And for us, it's really important to understand the productivity. Obviously we've been measuring wages for a long time, and while within the context of Arizona, the biosciences does well, and we understand that in some ways, a competitive advantage of Arizona is that its wages might be a little lower because its cost of living is lower. And so, but with having a high value environment, it might give you a competitive advantage. And that's true to a point. I do think, though, that one measure that we really would love to take a look at is the continued growth in productivity or value added per worker by the different sectors. Because for us, that's a measure of your product mix, the level of innovation taking place, the ability to, in essence, bring to market things that are, seen as of more importance and can command kind of higher returns. So that takes time in an overall economy, and again, it gets back and it's related to not only the great companies, existing companies that you have in Arizona in the biosciences, but your ability to get startups not only going but scaled up.
That's right. That's right. Well, we have quite a few more comments in the chat. Great questions, and I just want to say that we will get an answer to all of you as we go back and review those over time. But so appreciate everyone's participation today. This is terrific. So. Again, Mitch and Ryan, thank you for the report. Thank you for the responses to the questions. Thank you for responding to questions that you haven't even seen yet in advance. And now I would like to introduce the chair of Arizona's Bioscience Roadmap Steering Committee, Eve Ross. Eve spent much of her career with one of Arizona's largest bioscience companies, W.L. Gore and Associates in Flagstaff. She's retired from there, but has remained extremely active throughout the community, including service with us for more than a year as the Roadmap Steering Committee Chair. So Eve, I'll turn it to you now.
Like everybody else, I have to be able to unmute my own computer. So thank you, Tammy. It's wonderful to be here with everyone this afternoon. So 20 years ago, I was working at my desk at Gore in Flagstaff, and I got a call from Flinn Foundation about serving on a new committee, a committee to make Arizona a national leader in the biosciences. To give you an idea of how long ago that was, I was actually working at a desk. And of course, telephones have changed since then. I did indeed have the telephone on the left and a BlackBerry. We hadn't even seen flip phones yet. But in many ways, the fundamentals stay the same. The top selling vehicle in 2002 was the Ford F-150. Today, the top selling vehicle is still the Ford F-150. Our bioscience sector is much the same. We have so many new players on the scene, new companies, new incubators, new med schools, new hospitals, and many new companies. But our anchors remain the same. Arizona State University, NAU, University of Arizona, the community college systems, Banner Health, Mayo Clinic, TGen, Medtronics, and Gore. And some with new names like Dignity Health or Roche Tissue Diagnostics. 20 years ago, the idea of Arizona becoming a major player in the biosciences seemed a bit far-fetched. But here I stand 20 years later, helping to lead the effort. It's the institutions and their people that are driving us forward. As Tammy said, we have an outstanding panel to provide perspective and insight on the data presentation we just heard. We're fortunate to have three highly respected leaders from economic development, research, and healthcare, all of whom are also steering committee members. In the interest of time, I won't provide a thorough introduction of each, although you can view their bio sketches via the link now appearing in the chat box. Our panelists are Chris Camacho, the longtime president and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. GPEC was recently named the top economic development organization globally by the International Economic Development Council. Congratulations, Chris. Also joining us, Dr. Betsy Cantwell, Senior Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Arizona, who previously served as a lead research administrator at Arizona State University. Dr. Cantwell is perfectly qualified to answer some of these questions on academic R&D. And Gabriel Finley Hazel, President and CEO, Dignity Health Arizona Central and West Valley Markets, which is part of the Common Spirit Health, the largest nonprofit health system in the nation. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. I'm going to ask each of you questions. I'm also going to ask that you try and keep your answers to 3 minutes, although that's hard for me and I'm sure it's hard for everybody else. So Chris, I'll start with you. You are familiar with data like this on many different industries that are important to Arizona. Can you speak to the unique role that the biosciences play in complementing other industries or adding needed differentiation?
Sure. Well, thank you, Eve, and thanks to the other panelists for also being here. What an important conversation coming off the heels of just a tremendous change and success in the last 20 years that we're all observing before our eyes. I mean, I think about this semiconductor super cycle that we're all experiencing, the growth in everything from battery technology to chips, even our leadership in financial services. All of these industries have evolved in the last 20 years in a very similar fashion to that of the healthcare and bioscience sector. So this whole entire sector not only plays a critical role for the health and wellness of diversified economic base, but it also provides primary care support, virtual care, novel models that are being induced to meet the delivery of care needs across this community. And as I'll touch on a little bit later, Eve, and I don't know if that shout out of 3 minutes was meant for me or not, but I will follow direction. What I do foresee with this opportunity from the federal side through the Economic Development Administration, we're such a unique community where we've seen a pretty stark divergence in areas like social determinants of health and certainly life expectancy, whereby individuals like myself and Dr. Cantwell and certainly Gabrielle here today, we want to see society evolve. We want to see the advancement of economic progress under and through an equity lens. And at the same time, we really need to understand and grasp the changes before us. So when you see zip codes, for example, like 85258, the distinction between 85004, a 14-year difference life expectancy in about a 20-mile radius. So while there's so much positivity in terms of clinical care, applied research, in terms of the university data that was reflected, and really what I would characterize too as some very intentional investments over the last 20 years, my hat's off to the legislature, specifically those that are on that care about the biomedical and healthcare sector. Without those kind of strategic investments, there's no question we would not be in the position we are today. And so I'll talk further about the New Economy Initiative, the Angel Investment Tax Credit, all those ingredients that have been pivotal to our success over the last few years, and even dating back to the Proposition 301. All of these ingredients have manifested to the position we are today, and the biosciences continue to play a critical role to why we're seeing this economy much more diverse and resilient, and I'd even characterize more anti-fragile than it was during the last great recessionary period. So again, a lot of thoughts there, and I'll come back to a few more of those segments. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Betsy, Arizona's curve for NIH grants and academic R&D expenditures began to rise sharply around 2015. From your experience at both UA and ASU, what strategies taken by the universities or by the state were responsible for this increase?
Without suggesting that I can draw the direct line of responsibility, and Chris, we like to think about it, I think these universities represent a remarkable amount of the development of resilience for the state of Arizona, as opposed to, I hate using the word fragile because we've never been a fragile state, actually. We don't have that in our ethos. But there are three things, Eve, that we've really done, particularly over the last 5 years. We've all created research development offices that enable the connection between the basic research that goes on at the universities and a host of partners. Now, in the biosciences area, that means everything from the providers of clinical care to patients, to device manufacturers, to companies like Gore. Those partnerships are material in garnering large-scale federal awards today. We know it, and so we built offices to do that. In addition, and Chris, I'll let you sort of talk about the beginnings of TRIF, but the Technology and Research Investment Fund was incredibly prescient on the part of legislators in Arizona, and the universities have been able to do something many great things with that money. The most meaningful is creating the infrastructure underbelly, the core facilities that allow us to do the highest value basic research. And that is an area I'll come back to, because you have to turn that over on a regular basis or you aren't at the leading edge. So imaging facilities, microscopy facilities, biosafety level facilities, bioinformatics facilities. We are really well positioned, at least have been for the past 5 years, really based on both, I would say, investments from foundations like Flinn, and the TRIF investments have been remarkable. And then the last thing I'll say is that we have an ethos in the state. All three universities know that in order to deliver outcomes that are usable in the market or advanced health have impacts, we have to create centers that focus on specific types of problems. So at the University of Arizona, we have things like the Arizona Center for Rural Health to get to the question about how do we deliver what we know how to do into the citizens of Arizona, or the Comprehensive Pain and Addiction Center, which is really focused on opioid addiction. But I also like to highlight some of the incredible work that Arizona State University is doing now. I haven't been there for a while, but their focus on creating centers for the translation of health-related research to the community. And the one that I think is the coolest is the Health Future Center. That's a joint project with the Mayo Clinic that directly focused on taking really devices and more engineered health-related futures and delivering them into the population. So I'll end there, but those three things are really material to how we've been able to do this.
Thank you, Betsy. Gabrielle, kind of following on from that, talking about taking healthcare into the community, we've seen that hospitals are a driving force behind Arizona's bioscience employment numbers. Yet we also know that hospitals nationwide are losing healthcare professionals at a rapid clip, and the trend is projected to continue. Could you talk about how hospitals and health systems are adapting to this new dynamic, and where do you see your new workforce coming from in the years ahead?
Yeah, great question, Eve. And I think, the other part of that is I'm really happy the state of Arizona included hospitals in the definition around biosciences, because there is such a huge focus on not just clinical excellence, but also scientific discovery and translational research. That's really our secret sauce and what we contribute to the biosector. And so, as you can imagine, if we're losing healthcare professionals, that has an impact not only how we deliver care to the community, as somebody asked that question in the chat, but also how we're contributing to the biosector. So a couple of things are happening. I mean, every healthcare professional will tell you that's the #1 focus right now is the workforce and labor. And actually, there was some great points brought out around education that I want to talk about, but really there's 3 things that we've been looking at as far as the impact in the pandemic. It's actually even more amplified in Arizona for 2 reasons. One is because of the pandemic, and the other one is because of the growth. And so unlike most cities, when I talk to my colleagues across the country, they're not experiencing the type of population growth that we're experiencing here in Phoenix. That alone is also exacerbating, the issue. So for us, we've had to be really creative very quickly. And so you'll hear hospitals talking now about new models of healthcare delivery that's not centered just around the nurse, but really looking at a team approach where they're looking at using physical therapists, occupational therapists, pharmacists, EMTs in a different way than we've ever used them in the healthcare sector. The other thing for those of us that are heavily involved in biosciences in our hospitals, there's also a shortage of scientists, techs, researchers, all those team members that are needed for that scientific discovery. So that's where partnering with not just our bioscience team members, but also partnering with the schools is really important. And I think someone touched on, it might have either been Mitch or Ryan. It's so important that we go down to the K through 12 level. So we've got great partnerships with ASU, U of A, NAU, Creighton University. We have a huge health alliance, as you probably are aware of. We're now the largest provider of GME education in the state as a result of that alliance. But really, particularly when you start talking about diversity and the diversity of the workforce in the future, it's right here in Arizona. The population is growing. The K through 12 has the ability to really be part of that solution. So I would say 3 categories briefly as far as where we're looking for the future. One is using technology. There's going to be a lot more use in technology when it comes to how we deploy healthcare professionals. And there's something called acute care at home that we're piloting right now that will help with that. The second thing I would say is really around piloting different care models, which I just talked about. And then lastly is expanding learning opportunities. There's a lot of data around the need to provide more faculty for the universities to be able to produce more healthcare professionals. We're committed to doing that. And we've actually had many of our clinicians get trained so that they can be faculty as well. And then lastly is creating more clinical training sites, which is what we're doing across the state.
Thank you. It's a huge issue, and it sounds like all different avenues are being explored. So that's it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Chris, coming back to you, the initial focus of the roadmap was to build kind of the research and commercialization infrastructure to enable innovation to flourish. And we heard Betsy mention those investments in infrastructure that some roadmap efforts and efforts by others across the state made possible. You're kind of proposing the next step with GPEC's grant submission to the Economic Development Administration to further build out the healthcare economy. Could you briefly introduce this effort for the audience and speak to how it addresses what we've learned today?
Yeah, Eve, I think how I would characterize where I think we are, and both other panelists referenced kind of this immense tailwind of growth and speed of delivery of care, clinical work that's occurring with our universities, with our hospitals in the market. And one of the things that we still feel from an age perspective, I almost characterize it an analogy of like we're a very talented high school athlete that's about to bestow itself to the college ranks, and yet we're not fully refined yet. We're still experiencing this burgeoning growth where we have so many of these now assets across the entire state that are feeding innovation, driving additional applied research, enabling us to access NSF and NIH dollars unlike ever before. But at the same time, I would argue some of the intentional tax policy and intentional investments being made by our state government and even local governments too, but predominantly the legislature, are putting us on a plane to be one of those blue chip recruits. I'll come back to that basketball analogy. So for those of you in sports, maybe I lost half the audience there, but what I mean by that is we're definitely becoming an enviable place to learn from, to model what we've done just in the last 20 years, very different from San Diego or Boston or these other places that have had really 100 years run at building their bioscience sector, largely driven by defense investments. We're a very distinguishing place in that this has happened really in a rapid speed level over the last 20 years. So this Economic Development Administration grant opportunity, what I want to boil down very quickly, and I'll keep this just to kind of a few minutes of this overview because there's a lot here, but we had the chance to submit virtually any industry. So obviously we're experiencing massive growth in semiconductors, advanced electronics, batteries, a lot of these sectors, and above all, as we read the fine print of the EDA's interest, was to fuel a transformational investment that could be leveraged by a cohesive regional approach of public, private, institutional support. And hence, after going through our Health Innovation Council, derived that our health transformation approach was the most logical and would yield the most significant net benefit for the region. So what we did was, and I'm going to pull up my screen here, Eve, if that's okay here for a moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you see the screen here?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to drive your attention to a few, maybe 2 or 3 slides, because this further kind of clarifies this EDA submission. So imagine a universe where we have, a number of different partners, and that's obviously, UA that's on here today, ASU, NAU, a lot of the university partners, Creighton University and many others, along with the hospital networks in the community and all their innovation teams, as well as industry partners as well, and many individuals and firms as part of the capital ecosystem, and really shepherd this to what I'd characterize as a next generation transformational approach to healthcare, which has 6 interrelated quote unquote nodes or projects that are expected to be advanced over the next 4 years. Now, mind you, there were 590 plus applications to the federal government on this. They took 590 down to 60. So we are one of these 60 vying for phase 2, which is, as you can see, the potential investment is $154 million. So these are definitely consequential resources that could yield, as you can see on the right-hand column, across these 6 node strategies, just under 30,000 jobs and the massive level of new income and certainly economic impact. So we won't know the fate formally until September of this year. But the 6 nodes, and again, I'll run through these quickly, but this was done in a spirit of collaboration with just under 20 partners across the Valley. And this HVC, this Healthcare Venture Collaborative, is intended to be this ongoing fluid system build that would enable hospitals to identify problem sets that they are experiencing, and then leveraging that into the novel innovators in our community that constantly build, whether it's utilizing big data or software sets to help achieve or address these problem sets that currently reside in kind of a reverse pitch format within the hospital network. So it's this ongoing, constant system build process that we expect to deploy with these resources. Second, as you can see here, is a STEM West Innovation Hub. We sent out to all of our communities the opportunity to participate, and City of Surprise had the most compelling opportunity on this front to build and leverage some of their local existing assets, but also resources to build a West Valley hub for incubation and advancement of novel enterprises that not only would they co-invest in, but also provide product market strategy support to help these companies get to scale. The third element is this Health Futures Manufacturing Prototyping Center that's ASU led, along with a Mayo Clinic. So think of a rapid prototyping center to take ideas out of the lab and out of the operating room into creating, new med device strategies. And then fourth, fifth, and sixth is really about leveraging big data in an access platform with Contexture. There'll be a gentleman leading that effort to make recommendations to address the healthcare equity and the delivery of care, both in person and virtual care across the valley. And then fifth is really about the delivery of what Gabrielle referenced, is how do we ensure that we can deliver allied health professionals through nimble 2-year technical programs and shorter term certification programs in the most in-demand areas in the future. So that above all, that's the kind of the 5 nodes, with the 6 being very focused on how do we ensure post the 4 years that we're able to sustain all of these programmatic dollars. And I think the most significant, as I drop off here, back to the screen, make sure I've got you here. Okay, you still hear me okay?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Okay, I'm trying to get back to my main screen here. So, with that, the final stage of that is just the governance and sustainability attributes to ensure that post this 4-year, $150+ million grant, should we be successful, we create the runway for this work to continue and to continue to add value and drive the jobs and economic impact that we'd all hope for. So, I'll pause there, but that's a quick run through of what that program entails. And it's a big lift. Kathleen Lee and our team, along with Gabrielle's innovation team and many of the folks I mentioned, have been at this for the last 4 months. And so now we await the fate of the federal government, which is always fun and interesting. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Eve.
Thank you, Chris. And congratulations to you and to everyone who's worked on this, making that first cut, making that top 10%. And it's really exciting. And I love the focus on action. All these centers will allow actual things to happen as a result. So that's super exciting. Gabrielle, we've heard in Chris's presentation and other conversations today about the importance of digital healthcare. And certainly all of us know personally that during the pandemic, digital healthcare boomed. Could you talk a little bit about how telemedicine and AI are impacting the everyday business of healthcare at St. Joe's and Barrows Neurological Institute?
Sure.
Example.
Sure. I mean, I think I was just going to mention too, I know when Mitch and Ryan spoke, they talked about digital health IT really being an opportunity for us to grow biosciences further here. And I would say absolutely. And as you just mentioned, AI is a big part of that. An example of how we're making sure that we're part of that is we just invested millions of dollars in creating an AI division here at Barrow Neurological Institute with our Barrow Innovation Center. And it's super important for the future. What's great about, the pandemic brought a lot of things that were very difficult, but what's great is it created an opportunity for us to expand telehealth and digital health. And so now we're getting not just data that we would normally get in the healthcare arena, but also at home. And so there's a lot, as you all know, there's a lot more utilization around wearables. There's also a lot of apps now that connect the patient directly to their provider. And we're able to get all types of data. And what does that do? That creates enhanced data lakes, which I know all of our university partners love those data lakes because it gives us an opportunity to do more research. But we're using those data lakes to actually feed into our AI technology to really help us with disease progression and actually improving the way that we diagnose and treat various diseases. So I think we're going to see that more and more. And I think, within our state, and we're very fortunate to be in a city that is very supportive of biosciences and AI that allow us to bring some innovations into the state. So I think you'll see more of that. And I think it's a big part of what we do today, but it's going to continue. The pandemic has forever changed the way we do business, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, actually. I think that's silver linings, Betsy, Mitch ended his presentation by proposing that we look at a new metric, kind of more relevant to where we are today in the bioscience universe, I wondered, the roadmap has always relied primarily on NIH grants and academic R&D expenditures to gauge research performance. And I wonder, are there other indicators that you feel are important? How does Arizona do on these? And should we be adopting those indicators as metrics going forward?
So part of that, the answer to that is a really ongoing question with large public universities like the University of Arizona and ASU and across the country, and how we're able to measure our value economically in our regions. But so I'm going to answer from the perspective of a person who's also done a lot of economic development work. There are really three, because my whole remit is not just research, it is innovation. So it's all of the tech transfer and the translation and the assurance that we have economic value in the state of Arizona. So there are three areas that I would suggest we at least think about. One certainly is a broadening of the measure of research funding for the basic sciences, at least, beyond the NIH, because we know that NSF is setting up a brand new directorate called the Technology Innovation and Partnerships Directorate. It is focused 100% on the translation of basic research into product areas. And we know they will be, just like the EDA has interest in this area, we know there will be an enormous amount of funding. It will be regionally focused. We have heard this over and over again. And so the idea of measuring not just what about NSF, what about DOD, our universities get an enormous amount of biosciences funding from the Department of Defense. But these measures, and we are all talking about what are measures of multidisciplinary funding focused on biosciences outcomes, on health outcomes, on community outcomes that are associated with economic growth, and all of these things that we're talking about here. So I think within the next year or two, there'll actually be some really interesting measures there. The second thing, and I'll go back to what I talked about at the beginning, and Chris and that whole plan is really focused on, is we've got to really think about square footage in sort of three, maybe two basic areas. One is the research infrastructure that supports the basic research that gives us the biosciences outcomes we're seeking. We could craft them all in in economic terms, but we also are lacking. And I was cooked in the cauldron of San Diego and San Francisco, so it's almost not fair. But we are lacking translational incubator space, wet lab space for keeping our innovations here in the state of Arizona. So some measures associated with not just how many, we clearly, and Gabriella, we clearly have a lot of work, in my opinion, to do. We have students who would like to be here and come here, in keeping them here, but we also have some work to do in keeping our ideas here. When we look, 50% of our intellectual property portfolio is biosciences related, one way or another. Not all of that, any deal that's done with that, not all of that stays in the state of Arizona. Whether the money's here or not is one thing, but it's the space to actually rapidly incubate and accelerate. And then we do have this whole growing area of the Phoenix Biomedical Core, which is super exciting. And I think ultimately it is my hope will answer all of these. But this square footage measurement was really powerful in the San Francisco Bay Area, and looking at how to understand that investments were going from the universities into companies through. So square footage is a good placeholder for the Valley of Death for certain types of biosciences companies, particularly pharmaceutical companies, and some with heavy clinical or patient-facing requirements to get through that valley. And then the third is sort of measures of partnership. At the university level, we know we're not asked, for instance, at the moment by our Board of Regents to measure how many research partnerships we have, but we know that to deliver in the biosciences, that's a huge measure. And from my perspective, the more we measure it in the roadmap, the more the entire state pays attention and helps us develop those partnerships. So those are the three areas that, if we can find a way to measure, alternative sources of funding, if we can look at square footage basics, and if we can look at partnerships, I think we'll bring an enormous amount of translational focus to the research that our universities do.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have a follow-up question from the chat on this translational issue, Betsy, and that's, what do the Arizona universities have to do to be successful in getting one of the clinical translational science awards and being a nationally funded hub?
So there's a wide variety of answers to that question. They're very challenging to get. We have certainly tried 2 or 3 times and are in the midst of trying again. We believe in the state most of the assets. What we really, I think, need are a couple of things. One is frankly larger numbers of slots for our students in the healthcare to stay in the state. We can bring assets like our cancer center. We can bring assets like our All of Us program. We have a remarkable set of capabilities actually across all of our universities in unique approaches to technology-based delivery of healthcare to our most underserved populations and our rural populations. That's a point of pride for Arizona that we can use to build a CTSA around. Again, there aren't very many awarded every year. Arizona isn't, they tend to focus, how to say this nicely, on the areas where very large, so the coasts, where there are very large and established pockets of well understood value. We're still in, this is really a great example of the places where in the biosciences, we are still proving ourselves. And it's my opinion, we don't have to do that much more, but we just have to keep trying until we get one. And it was like acquiring the cancer centers that we have. We know we do it well, we train people well, but we do have to keep going back to the well. And this gets back to my partnerships point, because we need an all of the above perspective at a university. When we're going after a really large opportunity like that, we need the state to come support us. We need all the companies. We really need the all of Arizona in order to maintain that resilience focus and win. Those are material awards. So it's a good point. We need one.
Yeah, it'd sure be exciting to have one. Chris, you were leaning forward. You wanted to add something to Betsy's answer. Do you have a thought there on how to do this?
Well, I think she covered it well, that it does take the entirety of the village to lean into something like this. Biosciences is very different than software investments from general IRR perspective, the time frame of return on investment from the capital side. So, I think to her point that we've been this kind of burgeoning growth bioscience market for several years now. And I'm not a believer that we have to try to model or mock someone else, some other market. I think we grow organically. We keep this meritocracy kind of focus in place and still be, a welcoming market for innovators. And what I would share just a bit on our pipeline. So, for Metro Phoenix, we have about 300 companies currently evaluating the market across a number of different sectors. But 30 of those are in the bioscience, biomedical space. And 10 years ago, I could tell you that would have been on, one hand how many, in-migration interests there were. And I would argue too, the markets, I think of BioConnect in San Diego or the groups in Boston or San Francisco, the bioscience success is not a recruited in strategy. It's organically grown, connected the dots, investments coming from the private sector, certainly infrastructure investments. I mean, I can't underscore this enough. The legislative interest in intentional investments around things like the New Economy Initiative, these kind of future centers, while they may seem like space age, when you're talking about, like the CAMI facility that U of A's, working on, or Center for Future Health, these facilities are what bring world-renowned leadership in these disciplines to the market. And when you bring these world-renowned research individuals, then they tie into industry. Then industry, it's almost like a flywheel. And once you get that going, it's really hard to stop. So I feel like we're at that stage where the wheel's starting to turn, and that's where we're at. So Betsy, you have another thought? Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to just pile on that, Chris, a little bit, talking about the kind of the tech park, research park paradigm that our universities do well, and Arizona has sort of the opportunity to support even more, because we do an enormous amount in that initial phase of translation for companies, not meaning clinical translation, where some of them actually come and talk to us about space because they want contiguous space with the kind of people that are working at a university. We have, really good start at research parks, but when we look at, and we all, I know this, are moving our square footage in life sciences companies as fast as we can, startups.
Yeah.
But there's more room for the state to be thinking about this kind of tech park, research park approach, because biosciences companies are different. They need a really high turnover of ideas pretty quickly.
Moving ideas into the clinical world is a long, slow, often ugly, always difficult process. It's really rewarding when you get it right, but it's really tough, and turning things over quickly, being willing to make those changes is really important. So, I'm getting frantic texts saying that we're out of time. So it just goes to show we should continue this conversation over a beer someday. Thank you, Gabrielle, Betsy, Chris, for your insights and for the important roles that each of you play in this ecosystem, and for your service to the Roadmap Steering Committee. I'm going to close this event out, but before I do, I would really appreciate it. The Flinn Foundation would really appreciate it if you would take a quick survey on today's events. It's only 8 questions, should take less than 2 minutes to complete. You can access it at the link in the chat box. And I'm just going to be quiet for a minute while everybody hopefully dashes to the chat box and takes the survey. And then I'll close us out and say thank you to you all for joining us. Okay, because I know you're all rock stars and always were the people who finish the test first of anybody in the room. I'm going to wrap up and assume you finished the survey. So it's, I think, apparent that Arizona has made outstanding progress over the past 20 years. We see in the accelerating rates of growth that the investments of past years are paying off. We're achieving records across all of the metrics. The growth curve is ascending. We're beginning to receive national recognition for this progress, and our residents are reaping the benefits through higher wages and a stronger economy. But equally clear, this work is not nearly finished. There are many actions in the Bioscience Roadmap that still need attention, and every day presents new challenges to address and opportunities to seize. I'm proud of the research, innovation, and accomplishments we've accumulated since the inception of the roadmap, and invite you all to join us for many years of success in the future. Thank you all for joining us today.